Trying to conceive and feeling overwhelmed and confused with unhelpful information and advice? This podcast is for you. Welcome to Don't Tell Me to Relax. I'm your host, Hannah Pern, a fertility acupuncturist and passionate advocate for better fertility education and support. Our aim is to empower you with information to support your fertility journey and provide a community for connection with people who get where you're at. If you'd like to join us or work with us in clinic in London or across the UK, all the information is in the show notes at the end. This podcast is sponsored by Invivo Healthcare, the human microbiome company restoring human health and ecology with seamlessly connected testing, supplements and education. The Invivo team of scientists and practitioners work alongside healthcare practitioners to expand their expertise. As pioneers in testing, Invivo Ecologics range delivers a unique insight into the gut, vagina, oral and urinary microbiomes with unparalleled detail and accuracy. Their supplements are crafted using live commensal cultures and selected botanicals and designed with specific microbes in mind for a truly targeted approach. Invivo is a go-to in my clinic for microbiome testing and supplementation. For more information, visit invivohealthcare.com. Hello and welcome to this episode of Don't Tell Me to Relax. It's funny because we do like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown. I said to Katy, "Are you ready?" And I pressed the leave button and ended the recording. So this is our second attempt at recording this podcast episode. So I am back with my lovely co-host, Katy, and we are going to be talking all about how, as holistic practitioners, we thoroughly investigate fertility. And we thought it was a good one for January and the start of the year because we know lots of people go into the new year wanting to mix things up a bit and change things and kind of look at things in a different way. So that is what we are going to talk through today. But before we get into all of that, Katy, how is your January going so far? And how do you find January? Lots of people are down about the January time. Where do you stand on it?
Do you know what? This year, I'm really trying to embrace it. I have a history of being like, I hate January, I hate winter, it's all shit. And just like really hating on it. And I'm trying to enjoy the coziness. I've got a candle, but I've got a few candles, but I can't see one of them. I hope nothing's on fire. Got the candles burning. We're going to keep the twinkly lights up for a bit longer, even though you're not meant to, because it's just nice. So I'm trying to lean into it and just keep it super slow. So not really doing too much beyond the minimum, if I'm honest, and just like going with that. And actually, that's a lot nicer.
Yeah, it's a good way of thinking about it. I feel the same. I did a list of everything that we'd done, like work-wise, and then I did a list in my mind of everything that I'd done social-wise in 2024, and I felt a bit ill when I looked at it all because it was such a jam-packed year, and that was brilliant, but I was like, I would like to have a quieter, and you know, to be fair, last year was the year of 50, and all my friends were being 50, so there was a lot of socialising and, you know, big events. So and that was great, but going into this year, I'm like, I think I would like it to be a little bit slower and quieter.
I feel very similarly. I was saying to someone the other day, you know, the Roadrunner cartoon that's like running, and then it like falls off and it's still like running. I'm like, I kind of felt like that's what last year was in terms of it was amazing and so much great stuff happened, like work-wise, personally, but I'm also like only just catching up with myself. So,
It's a funny thing, isn't it? Because I wonder, I mean, we're going completely off tangent, but I wonder whether that, what we're talking about as well, is like a knock-on effect of those COVID years. That everyone seems to have forgotten about and doesn't like to talk about. But it feels like, you know, after COVID, it was like everyone wanted to be really busy and do all the things. Yeah. And I feel like that time has gone and it's like, okay, maybe time to kind of rebalance from those two extremes.
Says two of the busiest people that I know. So
two people who can't stop working. So, as I said at the beginning, we're going to be talking about a fertility, not the traditional way of assessing someone's fertility. We've got lots of episodes on that, and you know what we're talking about when we talk about the standard fertility assessment is the kind of like if you went to your GP or you went to a fertility clinic, what they would do to look at your fertility. And they would do your day 3 blood. So they'd be checking your hormones, usually FSH, LH, and estrogen on day 3. They'd be doing a progesterone test in the second half of your menstrual cycle. They'd be doing a transvaginal scan if you were lucky, and they would be doing a standard semen analysis. And all of which, as we say many times, is brilliant and everybody should get done, all of those things. But what we're going to talk about today is like, as holistic practitioners, we are different. We don't just look at the reproductive system as is. We kind of like take a step back and we look at the wider context of a person's fertility, because when we talk about fertility health, I think there is always this idea that it's something separate and different and apart from the rest of our bodies. And actually, when we talk about fertility health, we're talking about health. And as holistic practitioners, we are really into this idea that we don't just look at the person and the issue in isolation. So, for example, you don't just look at a headache and, you go to your GP with a headache. The questioning around that headache might be a bit more limited to how it is as a holistic practitioner. And I guess a lot of the reason why that I was thinking about it today is that we have the gift of time as practitioners. Our appointments are an hour and a half for the initial. And so that amount of time really does give us the ability to speak to people and find out all the information so we can make a wider assessment. So I thought that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're sort of just going to break it down a little bit and talk about some of the areas that we think are really important to assess and investigate to really help you fully understand your fertility, because it's a common question and a common thing we see in clinic is that people are like, they've either given a label of unexplained infertility and they're like, I don't understand. It makes no sense. Like on paper, there are no issues, but why are we not getting pregnant? Or people want to kind of really investigate and understand and do everything they can to optimize, to give them the best possible chance. And they feel like, an AMH blood test and a transvaginal scan isn't enough to properly understand what's happening with someone's fertility. So, Katy, do you want to start with like bloods? Because what I've talked about is like the basic bloods, but as holistic, hate the word holistic. I don't know why. Yeah, it really does not sit with me. And I've often like Googled like other words for holistic and there aren't any. So anyway, that's the main thing.
I do get it. I think there can be a bit of that kind of like, what's the like woo-woo correlation, not quite the right thing, but that it kind of can easily be like holistic, like it's just a bunch of quacks and
that's exactly what it is. It's like holistic is put in that like that exactly that group of like woo and I hate that as well, because it's like we're complementary. I don't like alternative either, because we're not alternative, not one or the other. We're complementing Western medicine. Anyway, sorry. Let's tell you can tell it's January. So, so from a holistic perspective and a wider perspective, what kind of things from a blood test point of view would we be looking at that might not be looked at by other practitioners?
So I think first of all, before we get into anything else, just talking about the timing of blood tests is so important. I say particularly when it comes to checking hormones, days 3 to 5 of your menstrual cycle are the crucial time for things like FSH, LH, estrogen, particularly those ones to get tested, because FSH and estrogen, like one can suppress the other as you get later into the cycle. So it's very important that they're timed properly. So if you go to your GP and they're just like, you can turn up any day and get your blood test done, you're probably not going to get the most accurate reading of where things are actually at and like if they're within parameters that we would consider to be healthy. So as we've previously mentioned, FSH, LH, estrogen, then also testosterone and prolactin are really, really important ones to be assessing. That can give you a view of like the follicular development and what can be happening, indications of things like PCOS. If the prolactin's high, that can be suppressing ovulation. So really important to get a view of what those hormones are doing. And then in terms of progesterone, also the timing of that is really, really important. We've definitely talked about that previously. It's typically known as the day 21 test, which unless you've got a 28-day cycle and ovulating on day 14, it's unlikely that that's going to be the right timing for you. So tracking your cycle, knowing when you ovulate and getting that test done for progesterone 5 to 7 days later, again, will give you a far more accurate read of, is your progesterone within a healthy parameter, and to know if you've ovulated. Other tests, so on your kind of standard workup, if you go to your GP, they may test your TSH, which is your thyroid stimulating hormone. But in an ideal world, you want to be getting a full thyroid panel. Again, this is going to give you a much broader view of what is happening with the thyroid and the links it can have to the menstrual cycle. So if you get your TSH, so thyroid stimulating hormone, your T4 and your antibodies done as well, then that's going to give you indications. Is it underactive? Is it overactive? Is there any autoimmunity going on there? Because that's a really important thing to be addressing if you've got fertility problems and there's this underlying autoimmune issue. So they're kind of some of the big hitters. And then alongside that, having your iron tested. I literally saw someone posting on Instagram earlier today, who you've had on the podcast, saying that iron's one of the supplements that she so often stops people taking, because you really need to have it tested to know if you should be taking it or not, because that can influence how the thyroid works. And also vitamin D, to have that tested in the winter months here. I mean, we're recording this on a cold day in January. It's probably going to get dark in like an hour. So getting your vitamin D tested, seeing if you need to supplement that, because again, that's very important for like follicular health and development. So it's a much broader kind of view than your standard blood tests. Also, getting things like AMH tested can be useful, but I'd say that's often more useful in the context of someone preparing to go into IVF. For kind of your first lot of blood tests, it's not always the be all and end all, and not an indication of you're going to hit menopause next week or anything like that, which I think it so often can be viewed as. But it can be a helpful one to also get tested. I think they're the main ones.
And I think what you've lovely, can't speak. Lovely, no. Anyway, what you've highlighted well is the wider look that we take. And, you know, if you worked with a nutritionist, an acupuncturist, reflexologist who specializes in fertility, we sort of think about things a bit broader and a bit out of the box. So very much, you know, in fertility clinics, I mean, often they will do like a full blood count, check iron and ferritin and all these things, but sometimes it can go missed, and a full thyroid panel can go missed. And if you're not in a fertility clinic and you're trying to conceive naturally, then these are the kind of things that you might want to look at to really, you know, get to the bottom of. Because again, if your iron stores are low, if you think about iron and how it brings that energy to the body, and you need that energy to help build those follicles, help your body kind of actually ovulate, and then help build that uterus lining, that if your iron levels and your ferritin stores are on the floor, and you might not even know about it, because it could be a really slow decline, then that's really could be impacting your fertility, and you might never know. So it's an important thing in our opinion, and what we're given here, I always like to say, is this is our opinion. You know, there are plenty of people out there who would say you don't need to do that, it's not necessary. But as holistic practitioners, these are the kind of areas that we look into.
So yeah, one other thing to kind of mention from that like holistic or complementary aspect of looking at blood work is often people like ourselves will use much narrower reference ranges in terms of what we would consider to be normal. So it could be that you're one of those people that you've had your bloods done, you see your GP and they're like, yeah, that's fine. And you're like, is it? But actually, if you're thinking about fertility, but I would also argue for overall health, the parameters that we use are so much more narrow and far more optimal for where people are actually going to get good reproductive and overall health as well.
Yes, exactly. Because a lot of the ranges are for the majority of the population.
Yeah.
So they have to be wider. And yet we know that like a lot of the time, especially things like iron, vitamin D, if you're at let's say vitamin D, if you're at the bottom of the vitamin D level, which is huge, the vitamin D scale is massive, then we know they are not optimal for your fertility. Actually, you want to be in the upper third of vitamin D. So it's really important that you know, this is kind of like what we're trying to emphasize with this episode is like taking that look, like a little bit of a deeper look. And, you know, when you've been told that something's fine, to not always take that at face value, because I was having this conversation with somebody who phoned up for a discovery call yesterday, and we were talking about, there's so much in the press about how women's health is so poorly treated, and it's important that we are educated to advocate for ourselves, and we are going back and asking for second opinions, and we're asking to see our results, and we're saying, well, actually this isn't good enough, I want it to be better, I want my vitamin D's, and this is why I need to know it. And that is kind of like what we sort of have to do, because it's clear that if we are relying on, no offense to medical professionals, but it's the system, if we're relying on the system to kind of give us that information, it's not able to. So we sort of have to do it ourselves. So, it's why we do this podcast. So that's really brilliant to think about the optimal rather than the, you've told all your lab tests have come back as being normal.
I completely agree.
And just sort of following on from that, is there anything else you want us to talk about with bloods, Katy? Because I was going to move on to scans.
I don't think so. I think that's kind of covered.
Okay. So again, in terms of scans, I would say it's really important to ask and push for a scan, and sort of those investigations. And actually, we have got an episode that might come out next week, because I think it will be well timed with this, about what the different types of scans are and what they're investigating and when you need to go for those scans. Because often people are not offered the right scans. They're sort of fobbed off with a very quick transvaginal scan and told everything looks okay, or they have surgery and there's no follow-up with the scan to check that the surgery has been effective. So we have this a lot when people have got issues with their lining and they've got scar tissue, or they may have suffered a miscarriage, and then there's sort of no follow-up to check whether there's been any lining damage or any retained tissues that could be impacting their menstrual cycle or what's happening in the future. And these are the things that, unless you know to push for them and ask for them, they can really impair your fertility. So again, starting with a transvaginal scan and then moving on to a hycoxia to check the patency of your tubes, and really making sure somebody's having a proper look at the actual environment is really important. And it is so often missed or not investigated properly. And again, a bit like we said before, and as I was having this conversation with the lady last night, is going for a second opinion. If you're still having issues and you feel, and you've been told everything's normal, how many people have we worked with, Casey, who have bleeding and they're told it's normal, it's just part of your cycle, and they have a scan and they're like, there's nothing there, and then they're left and they feel really like, hang on a minute, where do I go next? I mean, we see that all the time in clinic.
Too often. And
so, going for those second opinions and going back and saying it's still happening, and like pushing a bit harder. I'm not saying harder because I'm making it sound like, it's your issue, but, just kind of having the confidence to go back and say you're not happy with how things have been is an important part of getting the right answer and the right investigations.
Yeah, I think it's the confidence about it, being able to advocate for yourself, isn't it? And not being afraid to speak up and feel like, if you feel like there's something going on or you feel like something's not right, then I would just say it's always worth investigating and getting that second opinion if someone kind of just helps you.
Yeah, because that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, if you're not looking at it properly, and but the number of times that we sat with people and they're like, I wish someone had told me this a year ago, I could have done something about it, because they were sort of told everything was fine. And that is the reason why, we can sort of spend the time to really ask people, has it been followed up? Do you still have symptoms? Where are you at with the GP? Have you been back to the GP? I know, here's a letter, and sort of giving that kind of like confidence to kind of, go back again and try again in a different way. Or, if you've got the finances, referring people privately, using your private health insurance, all of those things is an important part of getting to the bottom of it, and not being sort of, not taking everything's fine as everything's fine, because yes, of course, a lot of the time it is, but a lot of the time it isn't. And it's important, if you don't feel happy, exactly like you said, is to get it investigated again.
Yeah.
So when it comes to men and investigating men, again, we talk about this. We've got lots and lots of episodes on this. But again, like, how is it different, the way that we approach it to, how it might have been approached previously?
Well, I think just the fact at all of acknowledging that there may be a male factor issue is probably like a really big point. Like, so often the onus of fertility issues just immediately gets put on to women because it's more present with a menstrual cycle, and you can kind of see or get a feel for what's going on in terms of fertility with how a menstrual cycle is presenting. But with male factor, unless it's tested, it's much harder to know. So I think just testing at all, I guess, is different. But I'd say that kind of getting tested early is the biggest thing that we would kind of advocate for. Looking into like the partner's lifestyle as well, and the vast majority of recommendations we make for menstrual cycle and like reproductive health will be beneficial of male health too when it comes to fertility. Forgot what the word was then. But get like testing early. So the general recommendation, I guess, is after a year of trying, but I'd say the sooner the better in a way. But if you've been trying at the right time of your cycle for you, then like getting tested after 6 months is probably a good shout. And looking at the parameters that we use for a semen analysis are much higher in terms of the parameters that we use, I would say, are different to kind of what the WHO guidelines are for what the normal parameters are, which are based on the 5th lowest percentile of the studies that they did. So the bar for sperm health is actually very, very low, whereas we would want to see those ranges being a bit higher. So I think the normal morphology is considered at 4%, so how the sperm is shaped, whereas someone like myself would want to see it ideally more around 12%. So seeing those parameters, like bumping them up a bit to see if the overall quality is better. Then you also want to think about, we don't often see men in clinic. I mean, come and book your partners in, please. But we'll be asking, like, does your partner wake up in the night to like urinate a lot? Have they had any infections? Any things like mumps that might have affected the testes? Any varicoceles that you might know about? Do they work in a hot environment or something? Because heat can impact the testes. So I've definitely seen it before where someone's partner was a chef and they're in a hot kitchen all day long, and it's like, how can you support that? And with infections and things, just making sure that anything gets cleared up. Sometimes it's worth doing a semen culture or a full microbiome test as well, which I know, Hannah, you're going to talk about microbiome a bit more. But they're kind of the main things. And just thorough investigation, particularly if there's any history of miscarriage, looking into getting like a DNA fragmentation test, because just male factor is quite a big part of miscarriage. So making sure that's thoroughly investigated.
And so I guess what we're going through here is literally a checklist. This is what we do in clinic, is go through each of these areas and make sure that it's been properly questioned to the client and then properly investigated. And another area that we look at, that we sort of go through, is again thinking about microbiome. And I know like this is an ever-changing field and there is a lot of new research coming out a lot of the time, but asking people about their vaginal health is not a question that comes up a lot with your GP unless you've got a particular problem. It's not a question that's often asked or investigated. So you might not have a problem now, but it might be something that you've had in the past, which we know can link to your long-term microbiome health. So asking questions about that is something we do a lot. And anybody who's got any digestive issues, if your digestion is not working well, and again, you wouldn't necessarily think, well, how is my digestion linked to my fertility? Why asking questions around that is like, what's the impact there? But if your digestion is not working well, or if you're like, you're having reactions to foods, it might suggest that your microbiome is off. It might suggest you've got a lot of underlying inflammation, things that can really impact your egg quality and your general health. So, if your gut's not working well, if you're not pooing, you'll have lots and lots of extra hormones running around your body. Or if you're pooing a lot, like, is your body able to take in any nutrients? And therefore, is that impacting like your ferritin levels, your egg quality, all of these things? So it's kind of like taking that step back. If you're listening to this and you're thinking about your own fertility, taking a step back and thinking, well, does my digestion work well? And if you want to find out more about digestion, we've got a whole episode about what does good digestion look like. then it's a really important area to think about. And again, Katie, we're going to say something about nutrition because that's another area that comes up a lot. And it was only at Christmas I was reading in the paper about there's been a massive rise of people supplementing and getting pins and needles in their hands because they've been taking too much vitamin B12 or B6, I can't remember, but it was one of the B vitamins, and it was causing peripheral
B6, because
neuropathy, is it?
Yeah, I think it might be B6 because the advice that I was given is to only take that like in the luteal phase and not be taking it all the time because it can cause issues with your nerves.
So, so clearly where I'm going with this random sideline is that like really understanding somebody's nutrition and what supplements they're taking is really important because you can take the wrong ones. And anyway, I'm talking about it. You talk about it, Katie.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the supplement thing is a really interesting point that I'm more than happy to give clients information about supplements, but I'm always like, go and work with a nutritionist if you're going to go and take supplements, because I know there's some books out there that give long lists of supplements and people go out and buy every single one to the point that they've spent a small fortune and they are rattling with supplements. And actually it's like, do you need to take any of those things? Are they relevant to the issues that you have? Are you actually deficient in those things and need to supplement? Are they interacting with any medications that you take? And all of those kind of factors. And you just can't supplement your way out of poor lifestyle. So getting the nutrition first and like making sure your diet is mostly made up of whole foods, you've got plenty of protein and fat in your diet, because that's going to help with like blood sugar regulation, which then has an impact on your metabolic health, which impacts the menstrual cycle, but also all sorts of other things like your brain and how that literally functions. Just getting a really well like rounded diet and not being like overly restrictive with certain things. I think there can be a lot of fear around food as well. And if you need to get the support, there's plenty of people that have either kind of like meal plans as like an accessible way, and or to work like directly with someone so you can just really get that like detailed support, because there's so many things that are beneficial that for your fertility that you can just get through your diet. So, and also if you're eating well, you're probably going to be feeling well. And that's one of like the things that I just think is so important, that on a day-to-day basis, you're like, you actually feel all right as you're going through the day. And I know in January, there can be a lot of like, lose weight and blah, 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 and that you need to lose the Christmas podge. And it's like, oh, just like, shut up. It's not helpful. Like, it's really not helpful. So just try and like tune that out, eat in a way that makes you feel good, and it's going to be overall supportive, and don't be rattling with supplements.
Yeah, I think also one of the areas that we look at and we spend a lot of time questioning someone on is around the stress. And I know this podcast is called like, Don't Tell Me to Relax, and I'm not going to tell anyone to do that. But, really taking a proper assessment with somebody about how their stress is and how it manifests in their body, whether it impacts their sleep, whether it's impacting their digestion. I mean, stress really does go to every single cell in the body and can impact so many things. It's important that somebody, I think, you make a sort of honest assessment of it and you really discuss it, because I think a lot of people might not necessarily realize that that's how their stress is showing up. And I think it's not about telling someone to not be stressed. It's about discussing ways that they could like address it, what is practical, what is reasonable, and spending some time on it. It amazes me that there is not enough time, whether you go to a doctor, whether it's for fertility or any other issue, that this is not always accounted for or discussed in any detail. And I guess if you think about it, you have 5 to 10 minutes with your GP, so they don't have that time. I guess the question is, are you stressed? Yes or no? Whereas I guess we really do spend some time going further into it. Like, do you feel stressed? When do you feel stressed? How stressed do you feel? Where does it show up in your body? Is it impacting any other areas of life? What are your stresses? And having that time to listen and, really discuss it rather than with any judgment or anything, just kind of discuss it with someone. I think can be really helpful because it is, and it's part of the picture. It's not the whole picture, and I'm not in any way saying stress is the reason that you're not conceiving, but it is definitely part of a fertility picture. Well, it's part of a health picture, so therefore it's part of a fertility picture. So really understanding that and sort of getting it out of the box and looking at it, that's all you're doing is like looking at it and saying, this is identifying where it is and trying to think about things that you could do that could help it. And I'm not saying it's going to go away. I think in Western medicine, it's definitely something that's missed. And whenever I listen to, I never remember his name, the Dr. Chatterjee, whenever I listen to his podcast or I've had a few of his books, what I'm always really amazed about is that, he is a doctor, obviously, and he's a doctor, I feel, who's sort of seen the light in that. What his whole premise is based on is that there is more to medicine than medicine. Like, and I mean that in the Western sense. There's more to medicine than giving out prescriptions and sort of, operations and all the very clinical side of things. And I think that that's kind of the journey that he's gone on. He takes a look at the wider things that impact our health. And I think that's what we're saying in this podcast episode is like the wider things in exactly the same way that can really impact your health and therefore your fertility. So Katy, do you want to tell us about tracking? Because again, this is another area where we have that gift of time to spend talking to people about it.
Yeah, so often you'll go to a GP or be at a fertility clinic, but like say you're at your GP, like are they even asking you, do you know if you're ovulating? Like how are you tracking that? Often GPs don't have this understanding of tracking the cycle, what that can look like. I've definitely heard it before where people are being treated for like yeast infections multiple times a year when actually it's cervical fluid, because even sometimes GPs aren't aware of or considering that as part of the picture. So, and then conversely, at a fertility clinic, like they might not even ask you if you're tracking because they're going to completely control your cycle. So there's not the same need to be tracking. So we have, like Hannah said, the gift of time of being able to go like, are you tracking? Tell us more about when you're ovulating. What is your bleed like? How long at each part of your cycle? And getting a view of what your cycle is telling us about how we can help you. Another thing that we do is we will ask you about your sex life and ask you how much you're having sex. Are you having sex at the right time of your cycle? In the app that I get my clients to use, we talk about getting hearts on the charts, which isn't me being a pervert. It is me being like, are you actually timing sex when you're seeing mucus, when you're in your fertile window? Because the other thing is, if you're not sure when you're ovulating, you could be having all the sex and then stopping at day 15, but maybe you're not ovulating until day 20 and you're just missing the window altogether. So we want to make sure that you know when you're fertile and you are having enough sex, depending on your various like circumstances, if it's like a low semen count or whatever, that you're timing sex accordingly to try and get pregnant. So we can really get into the detail of when you're fertile in your cycle, when you're not fertile, and what all the different things tracking can tell us. And then that way we can give support accordingly. And the tracking, well, as you know, I'm a bit obsessed with it, and it can just tell us so much. So if you have started tracking, come to your appointment with your app and we can look at it and with any charts that you've done yourself on paper, and it's really helpful info for us.
Yeah. I've had lots of people who said I took my charts to the GP or I took my charts to the fertility clinic and they didn't want to see them. Mm-hmm. Whereas, we really want to see them. We encourage you.
We really want to see them.
We really geek out about that information because it tells us so much about how your body is working. But I guess, it's just, I guess what we're showing here is just a sort of the difference in our approach and how we can really help you understand a bit deeper about what might be going on and where you can make improvements, because that's ultimately what people want to do, is they want to feel more in control and they want to feel like they've got a better understanding of areas that they can make changes to help give them the best possible opportunity. And I feel like a lot of the time between a GP and a fertility clinic, you're not getting that information, and it can feel very sort of medical and very focused on your reproductive organs only. And what we do is kind of, take a wider step, as hopefully we've got across. I mean, we literally do have a checklist. And I guess The other thing to say before we go is that the checklist does change depending on where you are at in your journey. So I think it's important to say that what we're talking about here is like, this is like the first step. So those people who are starting to try, they're starting to try naturally. Maybe they've been trying for a while and they want to like, think about things in a different way. They want to investigate. It might not be happening. There are deeper levels of investigations that nutritionists and acupuncturists and reflexologists would do depending on where you further down the line. So, I'm thinking here around stuff around immune systems and, when you've been through loss. So a bit more sort of complicated and further on, or IVF failures, there's even more digging that we can do. But what we're talking about here is that kind of first line approach for those people who are, maybe a year in. And just to say, there is actually a checklist, and if you want it, it's in the Facebook group. So if you're not in our community, then the link is at the end of this show, and you are very welcome to join and have a look at it if that's helpful to go through it. Katy, it's been so lovely to see you again and podcast again
nice
at the start of the year. Anything you want to say before we go?
No. I should say something, but I'm like, going to stay here in my blanket with my water bottle.
You're in your January energy where less necessary. You don't need to give out the energy.
Really leaning in.
I love it. Well, thank you, Katy. And I hope this episode, as always, has been helpful. If you have any questions, you're always welcome to message myself or Katy. And obviously, we're in the Facebook group if you want to reach out to us in there. And obviously, don't forget to follow us on Instagram. So we'll see you next week. We hope you have found this helpful. If you'd like more on fertility education, please see our Teaching to Conceive free course linked at the end of the show. You'll also find the link to join our community. For more personalised fertility support, you can work with us one-to-one in clinic and online. You can book a discovery call to find out more.